All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into Neil Gaiman's American Gods.
Ooh, very cool.
Yeah, and this is a book that has so much going on. But the thing that I found really fascinating from what you sent me, this excerpt from this academic paper, was the idea of free will versus fate.
Yeah.
And how those two things kind of play out in this really, I don't know, kind of magical, mythical world.
Right. And I think what's so interesting about Gaiman's approach is it's not just an abstract philosophical debate.
Right.
He embodies those ideas in these really vivid characters and these like wild situations.
Yeah, and it makes you think, like, even in our own lives, right?
Absolutely.
Are we really making choices, or is there some grand plan already laid out? Especially when you've got literal gods meddling in things.
Right. It kind of throws a wrench into the whole free will argument when you've got, Odin running around.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's start with our main dude, Shadow Moon.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a guy who gets the short end of the stick right out of the gate.
Oh.
He's just out of prison trying to get his life back together, and bam, his wife dies.
Yeah, it's like fate is just pummeling him from the very beginning.
And then he meets this super mysterious Mr. Wednesday, who, let's be honest, is kind of shady from the get-go.
Oh, totally.
And he gets caught in this crazy storm, like it's one thing after another.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting about that? The paper actually talks about this, how Shadow's early passivity
Oh, really?
is like a key part of that whole, like, is this fate or free will thing?
Oh, interesting.
Because at first he really is just kind of like going with the flow, almost like a puppet of fate.
Yeah, just getting pulled along.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But there's this one little moment, and the paper, like, points this out as super important that I thought was really interesting.
Okay.
It's when Mr. Wednesday is trying to recruit Shadow.
Yeah.
And Shadow hesitates.
Right. Just for a second.
It's so subtle, but the paper argues that, like, that tiny act of resistance
Yes.
is like this huge sign that free will is like peeking through,
It's like this first crack in that like destiny facade.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because up to that point, it's almost like he's resigned to just letting things happen to him.
Right.
But that hesitation, that's him making a choice, even if it's a small one.
Yeah, and it makes you think about, like, how many times in our own lives we just kind of go along with things.
Totally.
Without really stopping to think, like, wait, do I actually want this?
Yeah. Are we choosing, or are we just letting ourselves be chosen?
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this whole free will versus fate thing so compelling.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it's not just about Shadow.
Right. It's a question we all grapple with.
And then there's that whole crazy scene with the world tree.
Oh, yeah. That's a powerful one.
Talk about intense imagery, like Shadow literally hanging between life and death.
And between worlds, really.
Right. And the paper talks about this as like a moment where Shadow becomes aware of the forces at play.
Yes. Like he's finally seeing the strings,
Yeah, the strings of fate.
And the possibility of like cutting those strings.
Right. And choosing his own path.
It's like he's waking up to the whole game.
And it's interesting because even in those old myths, right?
Yeah.
Like those heroes, they were destined for greatness and all that.
They still had to make choices, right?
Yeah. Like Odysseus was fated to get back home.
But he made a lot of bad decisions along the way.
Exactly. It wasn't just like, boom, he's home.
He had to navigate all those trials and temptations.
And fight off monsters and all that.
Right. And I think Shadow's journey is kind of like a modern take on that.
It's like that ancient struggle is still playing out, just in a different context.
In a world of roadside diners and casinos and like internet gods.
Okay, speaking of gods, we can't forget about them.
Oh, yeah. They're kind of important in this whole thing.
They're not just watching from the sidelines, they're like meddling.
Oh, yeah, they are in the thick of it.
It's like they're playing this cosmic game and we're just the pieces.
And that's one of the things that Gaiman does so well, I think.
What's it?
He uses these figures from mythology to represent these forces that are bigger than us,
Oh, I see.
Like the old gods, they embody those ancient powers, those like deep-rooted patterns of fate.
Okay, so like Mr. Wednesday, or Odin as we find out later.
Yeah.
He's like the ultimate puppet master.
Oh, totally.
He's always scheming and manipulating, trying to get everyone to do what he wants.
He's got a plan for everything.
And this is where things get really wild, right?
Oh, yeah, buckle up.
Because the paper points out that Shadow's parentage...
Wait, you're talking about...
Yeah, the whole Odin being his dad thing.
Right.
That's not just a plot twist. It's like this huge statement about fate.
It's like Gaiman is saying you can't escape your destiny, even if it's like written in your DNA.
Oh, wow.
And it makes you question like how much of Shadow's journey was actually his own choice.
Hold on, so his own father, the god of like fate and destiny, has been orchestrating his life this whole time.
Yeah, it throws a whole new wrench into things, doesn't it?
It's like family drama, but on a cosmic scale.
Exactly. And it raises this huge question. Can Shadow ever truly break free from that?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, if your own dad is a god who's pulling the strings, how much free will can you really have?
Right. Like, how do you even begin to fight against that?
And it makes you wonder about our own lives, right? I
Absolutely.
mean, maybe it's not a literal god, but are there forces that shape our choices in ways we don't even realize?
Yeah, like, are we really calling the shots, or are we just playing out a script that's already been written?
It's kind of a mind-blowing thought, right?
It definitely makes you question things, like,
Yeah.
how much control do we actually have?
All right. Well, on that note, I think we need to take a little break.
Yeah, let's process all this.
And then we'll come back and dive even deeper into this whole free will versus fate thing.
Sounds good. I'm ready for more.
All right, we'll be right back. Like, are we just born into these roles and we're expected to play along?
Right, and that's where this whole idea of rebellion comes in.
Yeah, like what happens when someone says, no, I'm not playing your game?
And this is where Gaiman really flips the script
Mm.
on the whole fate thing.
Oh, how so?
It's not just about the old gods and their ancient power. He brings in this whole new set of gods, right?
Yeah, the new
The
gods.
gods of technology and media, the whole, like, modern world.
Okay, so like Technical Boy and media.
Exactly. And they represent these new forces that are shaping our lives.
Yeah, and the paper argues that they're just as much a threat to free will as the old gods.
Oh, absolutely, maybe even more so.
Really? Why is that?
Because they're sneaky.
Sneaky how?
They don't use brute force like Odin. They work through influence.
That's
They shape
that.
our desires. They make us think we're making choices when really they're kind of nudging us in certain directions.
Like how?
Think about algorithms, right?
Oh, yeah.
They decide what we see online, what ads we get, all based on our data.
It's like they're reading our minds.
In a way, yeah. And then there's media, you know.
Yeah, like TV and movies and all that.
He creates this whole world of images and stories
Mm.
that shape how we see ourselves in the world.
So it's like this constant bombardment of messages that are telling us what to want, what to think, what to be.
Exactly. And it's so subtle that we often don't even realize it's happening.
It's like we're living in this matrix or something.
In a way, yeah. And I think that's what makes Shadow's rebellion so powerful.
Oh, yeah, when he walks away from that whole war between the gods.
Right. He's saying, I refuse to be a part of this
And
system.
he's like, I'm going to choose my own path, even if it means going against the guys themselves.
Exactly. And that's a huge moment because it shows that their power isn't absolute.
Yeah, it's like he's breaking free from the puppet strings.
Yeah, it suggests that maybe we can too.
That's a pretty optimistic thought.
I think so. It gives me hope, at least.
Okay, so Shadow's rebelling against the guys, but what about Laura?
Ah, Laura.
She's kind of rebelling too in her own way.
Yeah, even though she's,
Dead.
well, yeah, but even in death, she's not just following some preordained script.
Right, she's got her own agenda.
She's driven by this fierce love for Shadow and this desire to make things right.
And she's not afraid to get her hands dirty.
Let's just say she's not your typical passive damsel in distress.
I mean, she literally claws her way out of the grave.
Talk about defying expectations.
And the paper makes this really interesting point about how both Shadow and Laura,
Yeah.
they're both rejecting the roles that have been assigned to them.
That's a great observation. They're both saying, screw fate, I'm going to do things my way.
And it's interesting because their journeys are so different.
Totally. Shadows is all about like this epic struggle against cosmic forces.
And Laura's is more like this gritty, personal quest for redemption.
But they both end up challenging the whole idea of destiny.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to the complexity of Gaiman's world.
Oh, definitely. He doesn't give us easy answers.
It's not like, oh, here's the solution to the free will versus fate debate.
It's more about exploring the nuances.
Your gray areas.
Yeah, exactly. And showing that even in a world where gods exist and destinies are intertwined,
We still have the capacity to make choices.
to fight for what we believe in,
We carve our own paths.
even if it's just one tiny act of defiance at a time.
Okay, so that's pretty powerful stuff.
I think it makes you think about your own life in a different way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it makes you appreciate the power of stories to like make us question the world around us.
Absolutely. Gaiman is a master of that.
All right, so we've talked about Shadow and Laura and the gods.
We've covered a lot of ground.
But what does all this mean for us?
That's the big question, right?
How do we apply this whole free will versus fate thing to our own lives?
Especially when we're not dealing with literal gods and magic.
Right, exactly. Like, I'm not going to run into Odin at the grocery store.
Probably not. But the forces that he represents, they're still out there.
Oh, I see. Like, what do you mean?
Those ancient patterns, those societal expectations,
Mhm.
those things that try to define us and limit our choices.
Yeah. I guess I can see that.
And then there are the new gods,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, technology and media.
They're still shaping our desires, influencing our thoughts.
So it's like this constant battle
Yeah.
to stay aware, to make conscious choices.
Exactly, and I think that's where the real challenge lies.
To not just passively accept the script that's been handed to us.
To question the narratives, to seek out alternative perspectives.
To be the authors of our own stories.
Exactly, and that's something we can all do, even if it's just one small step at a time.
I like that, one small step at a time.
It's not about achieving some perfect state of free will.
Right. It's about the journey.
About the struggle.
About those moments when we choose to say no to the things that are trying to control us.
And yes, to the things that light us up, that make us feel alive.
That make us feel like we're truly in the driver's seat.
Exactly, and I think that's a message worth remembering.
It is, and it's a message that's at the heart of American Gods.
Gaiman reminds us that even in a world that can feel chaotic and overwhelming,
we still have the power to make choices.
to shape our own destinies.
To be the heroes of our own stories.
And that's pretty damn inspiring, if you ask me.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it? About like all those little choices we make every day.
It all adds up, right?
And are we really in control, or are we just kind of reacting to whatever life throws at us?
It's that age-old question, isn't it?
And does American Gods give us like a clear answer to that?
Well, you know what's interesting is the paper actually talks about how the ending doesn't really tie things up in a neat little bow.
Oh, really? So it's not like Shadow suddenly becomes this master of his own destiny.
It's not that simple.
But he does go through a lot of growth, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like by the end of the book, he's not the same guy who walked out of prison.
He's been through the ringer. He's faced down gods. He's literally died and come back to life.
So he's got to have learned something from all that, right?
Right, and I think what he learns is not necessarily how to control fate.
But how to understand it, maybe.
Yeah, and how to make choices within that framework.
So it's not about like erasing fate completely.
It's about recognizing that it's there and then figuring out how to navigate it.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I think that's where the real takeaway is for us.
For us, like in our everyday lives.
Yeah, exactly, because even if we're not dealing with literal gods and prophecies,
Right.
we still have to grapple with those forces that try to shape our lives.
Like societal pressures and expectations.
Exactly, and those sneaky algorithms we talked about.
Yeah, those things are everywhere.
They're constantly trying to nudge us in certain directions to tell us what to buy, what to think, what to believe.
So what can we do about it?
I think the key is awareness.
Awareness.
Like that moment when you realize, oh, wait, this ad is totally targeting me based on my online activity.
Right, and then you have a choice.
Exactly. You click on it or do you scroll past?
Do you buy into it or do you question it?
Right. Do you let the algorithm control you or do you take back control?
That's a good point.
And it's those little choices that add up over time.
So it's not about like this big grand act of rebellion.
It's about those everyday moments where we decide to think for ourselves, to choose our own path.
Even if it's just like choosing to read a book instead of scrolling through social media.
Exactly. Or spending time in nature instead of watching TV.
Or having a conversation with someone who has different views than you.
Right. It's about exposing ourselves to different perspectives, challenging our own assumptions.
And ultimately deciding what we believe and what we value.
And then acting on those beliefs.
Even if it goes against the grain.
Even if it means making choices that other people don't understand.
So it's like this ongoing process of self-discovery and self-definition.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes life so interesting.
Yeah, because it's not predetermined. It's not set in stone.
We have the power to shape our own stories.
And that's a pretty empowering thought.
I think so. It gives me hope.
Me too. It makes me feel like even though the world can be crazy and unpredictable,
We're not just along for the ride.
we have a say in how things unfold.
We can make choices that matter.
We can be the heroes of our own stories.
Exactly. And that's a message I think we can all take away from American Gods.
Yeah, I mean, it's a book about gods and monsters and all this wild stuff.
But at its heart, it's really about us.
About our capacity for choice, our potential for growth.
And our ability to shape our own destinies.
Well said, and I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I agree.
So to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into American Gods.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, even in a world where things can feel predetermined,
Your choices still matter.
so keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep choosing your own path.
And until next time, keep those minds open and those hearts curious.